Good morning. I am Reverend Claudia Elferdink, and I am your worship leader this morning. I am honored and delighted to be here with you today. As a member of this congregation and a retired minister, I am advisor to the pastoral care team, and many of those people are with us here this morning. They invite you to stay in touch. All of our songs and readings this morning come from our gray Unitarian Universalist hymnal. We like to say UU for short. If you have this hymnal at home, you might want to get it now so you can follow along. Words will be on the screen as much as possible. I want to take a moment to introduce you to our theme this morning. Keeping faith in hard times since 1568. In the United States, we live in a culture that values rugged individualism. This is assumed in much of our lives, from our Bill of Rights and our unfettered capitalist economy, our gun laws, and even to our own UU principles. Often our current struggle with hard times focuses on our own individual, personal fears and hopes. This is only human. I'm a minister who have traveled and studied with the ancient Unitarian Church in Transylvania. Few Unitarian Universalists here know of our European liberal religious cousins. Unlike us, they are not coming from a country that is enormous, rich, protected by a constitution, and now dominates the world. Our American English language is the essential world language. Transylvanian Unitarians are from an obscure country smaller than New England. They have been oppressed and impoverished by settler colonialism for over 4 centuries and speak an obscure language, Hungarian, known as one of the world's most difficult languages. Yet today, because of a history and culture which is extraordinarily different from, and almost 300 years older than, our own Unitarian story in the United States, Transylvanian Unitarians may have something to offer us about living through hard times. In 2013, I traveled to Transylvania on sabbatical to volunteer in the Unitarian Archives in the provincial capital of Kolozsvár. The decayed cement block apartment houses remain from oppressive communist rule. They stood out like burned trees in a lush green forest of ancient medieval buildings. If you have traveled in Eastern Europe, this may be familiar to you. When I arrived, Lehel Molnar, the Unitarian archivist, told me that the mayor there was very corrupt and crazy. "We just ignore him," he said. Over and over, Unitarians said to me, "We are a minority in 3 ways. We are a minority religion, a minority language, and a minority culture. We have lived through hard times, and we have survived." I was impressed by the people's determination to persevere in such neglected and craziness circumstances. Having lived under centuries of ruthless kings, cruel tyrants, Nazism, the despotic communist leader, dictator Ceausescu, until 1989, they have indeed suffered pain and loss and death. Yet Unitarianism has survived. I felt relieved that I lived in the United States. This would not happen in America, I naively told myself. Just 3 years later, after our last presidential election, I was shocked to realize that such neglect and corruption could happen here. My own American exceptionalism was dead wrong. I was humbled, sad, and frankly afraid. Immediately I called Lahel and said, "How do you do it? How do you survive day to day under incompetent leaders?" He said, "Claudia, remember your liberal values. Remember your liberal values." So today we explore our liberal values. Our 7 UU principles are about values. Are they values we share with Eastern European Unitarians? How might our liberal faith guide Americans in hard times? We will consider some of the wisdom and pain of Unitarians who have survived such times, not a week or several months, but over 450 years. We will center the stories of survival of these little-known, marginalized Unitarians. So now we gather with a chant, sung and written this spring by my friend Beth Norton, to bring us together here and now. Beth Henderson Norton is music director at First Parish UU in Concord, Massachusetts. In a moment, her face will appear twice on the screen as she sings both parts of the chant. We are together in this place.
Look into my eyes. Look into my eyes. Listen to my voice. Listen to my voice. I am with yours. I am with you in this place. In this place. Look into my eyes, look into my eyes, listen to my voice, listen to my voice. I am with yours, I am with you in this place, in this place. Look into my eyes, look into my eyes, listen to my voice, listen to my voice. We're together in this place, in this place. In this place, in this place.
Good morning, USNH, and welcome to this Sunday's online worship service. My name's Ethan Lowy. I'm a member of the congregation, and it's my privilege to deliver this morning's call to worship. This is From the Fragmented World by Philip Hewitt. From the fragmented world of our everyday lives, we gather together in search of wholeness. By many cares and preoccupations, by diverse and selfish aims, we are separated from one another and divided within ourselves. Yet we know that no branch is utterly severed from the tree of life that sustains us all. We cherish our oneness with those around us and the countless generations that have come before. We would hold fast to all of the good that we inherit, even as we would leave behind us the outworn and the false. We would escape from bondage to the ideas of our own day and from the delusions of our own fancy. Let us labor in hope for the dawning of a new day without hatred, violence, and injustice. Let us nurture the growth in our own lives of the love that is shown in the lives of the greatest men and women, the rays of whose lamps still illumine our way. In this spirit we gather, in this spirit we pray.
We light our chalice with love, grateful for our Unitarian Universalist stories. We acknowledge we are living on the traditional lands of the Quinnipiac Nation. These people of the Long Water Land have survived English, Dutch, and American colonial oppression since the 17th century. As a congregation, we strive to heal the wounds of our past and present in the ongoing work of reconciliation. We live in hard and beautiful times, a time of reckoning. May we seek unity and strength with our liberal religious sisters and brothers around the world.
My name is Susan Meredith. My pronouns are she, her, hers. On behalf of the Unitarian Universalist Society of New Haven, I welcome you to this Sunday service. If this is the first time you are joining us or the first time in a while, please contact us via email at the address here so we can properly welcome you to our community. Wherever you find yourself on this journey, I hope that you find messages of healing and comfort and challenge here. Out of all the things you could be doing right now, you chose to spend this time with this congregation. We are gathered by necessity electronically this morning, but made up of very real people. I am so glad you made it here. This is a congregation that believes that Black lives matter, that every person has the right to their own gender identity, that all people are inherently worthy. We seek to connect, to covenant, and to serve in the sacred hope that we might grow love and justice in the world. In the words of Sophia Lyon-Faz, we gather in reverence before the wonder of life, the wonder of this moment, the wonder of being together, so close, yet so apart, each hidden in our own secret chamber, each listening, each trying to speak, yet none fully understanding, none fully understood. We gather in reverence before all intangible things that eyes see not, nor ears can detect, that hands can never touch, that space cannot hold, and time cannot measure.
I'm Jen Kabranov. We are especially drawn to worship together in these times. After our joys and sorrows, we invite our children and youth to join us for stories and meditation for all ages. Let us turn our attention now to the concerns of this community. I now invite you to join me in holding in our hearts the joy and sorrow of those around you. Closing your eyes and going inward if you are comfortable doing so. Today, some woke with a sorrow so great they asked for the help of this community to carry it. Others woke with a joy so great it must be shared. Fred Morrison wrote, "My son, Greg Morrison, lost his battle with heroin addiction and died of an apparent overdose last week. No words are adequate to express the grief and sadness his mother, family members, and I feel. For the joys and sorrows that haven't been spoken, but which remain in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts, we bear witness."
It is time for all ages. It's a time for an activity which I hope you enjoy. Put up your hands like two U's, and it goes, "We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people with open minds, loving hearts, and welcoming hands." I showed this one time to a group of parents, and a few months later, one of the mothers came up to me and said, "You know, my daughter told me she went to day camp," and this is a 3-year-old daughter. And the first morning they sat in a circle, and there was another child in the circle from her Sunday school. And so they both looked at each other, and they didn't quite know what to do. They recognized each other, and they both started going, "We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people with open minds, loving hearts, and welcoming hands." Please join me again. We are Unitarian Universalist. We are people with open minds, loving hearts, and welcoming hands. In a book called The Water Dancers, author Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is a Black American author, paints a scene with Harriet Tubman. She was called Moses because she helped enslaved people in the southern United States go to freedom in the North, like Moses did in the Bible. Tubman was talking to her young protege, Hiram, about the importance of remembering her people's freedom stories. Listen. "We forgot nothing, you and I," Harriet said. "To forget is to truly slave. To forget is to die." She turned to me with eyes of the same green fire that had grown up out of the night. "To remember, friend," she said, "for memory is the chariot, and memory is the way, and memory is the bridge from the curse of slavery to the boon of freedom." Harriet Tubman knew the power of stories going back to 1619 and the beginning of slavery in America. She found her strength standing on the shoulders of her ancestors. Their stories of struggle fueled her soul. Transylvanian Unitarian stories go back to this time, even a little further. They can also be powerful when we know them, when we remember them, and when we use them in our personal daily lives and in our congregational lives. Here's one story for you. It's about the beginning of Unitarianism. Francis David was a young man living in a small province in eastern Hungary called Transylvania over 4 centuries ago. Many know that Transylvania is the home of Dracula, a make-believe monster. But it's a real place. The real Transylvania was always treated as a colony. The people were exploited by the Ottomans to the east and the Habsburgs to the north, great empires in their time. But Franz David kept asking questions. He was curious and open-minded. He believed in reason. It was during the Reformation, and he was raised a Catholic and went to Wittenberg, Germany, to study to become a priest. His curiosity led him to Martin Luther, who challenged the corruption of the Catholic Church. David, still a Christian, became a follower of Luther and returned to Transylvania. He kept asking questions and felt the people had the right to belief based on reason and their understanding of the Bible. King John Sigismund of Transylvania was so impressed with Ferenc David's liberal Unitarian ideas that he made him court preacher. Religion was, and still is, part of the government in Eastern Europe. Religious liberals all over Europe were punished as heretics, and they fled to Kolishvar for safety. They came from Italy, France, and Germany to work together for Unitarianism, a faith of reason and compassion. In 1568, the king proclaimed religious freedom in the Edict of Torda. It was just one paragraph. Listen to his words in only 4 complicated sentences, so listen carefully. Preachers everywhere are to preach the gospel according to their understanding of it. If the parish or the congregation willingly receives it, well, but if not, let there be no compulsion on it to do so, since that would not ease any man's soul. But let each parish keep a minister whose teaching is acceptable to it. Let no superintendent or anyone else act violently or abusively to a preacher. No one may threaten another on account of his teaching with imprisonment or deprivation. For faith is the gift of God. It comes from listening and listening through God's word. Sadly, 4 years later, King Sigismund died. The Unitarians insisted on their religious freedom, and the rulers ever since have felt threatened and have punished the Unitarians for their open-mindedness. But the Unitarians remembered the Edict of Torda and their right to religious tolerance, and have kept their faith since 1568. When I heard this story as an American, I realized it was not a declaration of personal freedom. It was like we have in our Bill of Rights. It was freedom shared by a congregation to call a minister whose faith they shared. It was freedom for a religious community together to listen and understand together the Bible's teachings. Spirit of life, come unto us. Memory is the bridge to freedom. So now we go on to our meditation in sight and song. Our meditation today is a journey for the eyes and the ears. We will join the choir from the UU Church in Atlanta as they travel and sing with Transylvanian Unitarians. Throughout, they will sing Find a Stillness, number 352. If you look closely, you'll see the tune is called Transylvania. It is a lovely hymn sung with the original Hungarian words in Transylvanian Unitarian churches. But the English version is not a translation. It is written in the sense of American Unitarianism by an American named Carl Seeger, and it was written for the hymnal that was published in the 1990s that we're using today. In a moment, we will see a video made by the people from the Unitarian Universalist Church in Atlanta. They have a partner church in Transylvania, and in this video, they sing Find a Stillness, the American version, while we see them visiting their partner church in Seke Uvarhe. Hungarian is not an easy language. Then they go on to Kolishvar, where I spent time in the archives. It is the provincial capital of Transylvania. Here you will see them singing in the large Unitarian church they call the Mother Church. Last, we go to Budapest, a day's train ride to the west. The Unitarian Church there has a chalice in stained glass to celebrate American support for building that church over 100 years ago. Find a Stillness, number 352. You'll notice it's sung in a minor key, and it has that sound of longing and suffering and humility. Watch, listen, and sing along.
We have so much to be grateful for, and we have so much to offer to each other. Every week, we lift up the spiritual value of generosity by taking an offering for the ministries of this congregation. You may not be able to contribute in person, but we still need your offering more than ever in these tough times. Our music this morning comes from our beloved Unitarian Universalist, Pete Seeger, when he sang on the David Letterman Show. He is singing Take It from Dr. King. Pete's song will give you ample time, if you like, to go to our website, usnh.org, or snail mail a check to the Unitarian Society of New Haven office on Hartford Turnpike. Your contributions will be gratefully received. And now reading number 674 from Brandick L. Lovely. Let there be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is sacred to so many of us, a community of memory and of hope, for we are now the keepers of the dream.
Down in Alabama, 1959, Not everybody here tonight was then alive. A young Baptist preacher led a bus boycott. He showed a way for a brand new day without firing a shot. Don't say it can't be done. The battle's just begun. Take it from Dr. King. You too can learn to sing, so drop the gun. Oh, those must have been an exciting 13 years. Young heroes, young heroines. There was laughter, there were tears. Students sitting down at lunch counters, children dancing in the street. To think it all started with Rosa refusing to give up her seat. Don't say it can't be done. The battle's just begun. Take it from Dr. King. You too can learn to sing, so drop the gun. Oh, you know what? You could sing this chorus with us. Don't say it can't be done. Sing that.
Don't say it can't be done.
The battle's just begun.
The battle's just begun.
Take it from Dr. King.
Take it from Dr. King.
Let's sing those 3 lines.
Don't say it can't be done.
The
battle's just begun.
Take
it from Dr. King.
You too can learn to sing.
You too can learn to sing.
So drop the gun.
So drop the gun.
Now you know the whole chorus.
Don't say it can't be done.
The
battle's just begun.
Take
it from Dr. King. You too can learn to sing, so drop the gun.
Songs kept them going and growing. They didn't know all the millions of seeds that they were sowing. They were singing on marches, even singing in jail. Songs gave them courage to believe they would not fail.
Don't say it can't be done. The battle's just begun. Take it from Dr. King. You too can learn to sing, so drop the gun.
We sang about Alabama, 1955. But since September 11th, many wonder, will this world survive? But if the world learns the lessons from Dr. King, we can survive, we will! And so we sing.
Don't say it can't be done. The battle's just begun. Take it from Dr. King. You too can learn to sing, so drop the gun.
You're singing better and better and better. Put them together.
Don't say it can't be done. The battle's just begun. Take it from Dr. King. You too can learn to sing, so drop the gun.
Our reading today is by Clint Smith, a Black American poet. When people say we have made it through worse before, all I hear is the wind slapping against the gravestones of those who did not make it, those who did not survive to see the confetti fall from the sky, those who did not live to watch the parade roll down the street. I have grown accustomed to a lifetime of aphorisms meant to assuage my fears, pithy sayings meant to convey that everything ends up fine in the end. There is no solace in rearranging language to make a different word tell the same lie. Sometimes the moral arc of the universe does not bend in a direction that will comfort us. Sometimes it bends in ways we don't expect, and there are people who fall off in the process. Please, dear reader, do not say I am hopeless. I believe there is a better future. It's a better future to fight for. I simply accept the possibility that I may not live to see it. I have grown weary of telling myself lies, that I might one day begin to believe. Some of us, we are not all left standing after the war has ended. Some of us have become ghosts by the time the dust has settled. This is a painful poem to listen to, but it's also perhaps a relief, because he states the great fear that many of us have, that our lives will end, that we will die sooner than we had thought. Those of you who have read Being Mortal realize, and many I'm sure also realize, that death comes. And it doesn't necessarily come when we want it to come. And apart from the pandemic we're going through now, it could come sooner or later. But somehow feeling the threat, feeling the danger as imminent can be very undoing. There's one saying that being human is living knowing that you will die. That is our work, our spiritual work to do, particularly in this time. But what Clint Smith is telling us is that there's something greater than ourselves. There's something to live for with meaning in making the world better, even if we do not live to see it. So now, keeping faith in hard times since 1568. Transylvanian Unitarianism and American Unitarianism were born in very different times. Consider how differently we are in our own families as we see the world born in different times. My white grandparents were born at the end of the 1800s. Their worldview was shaped by World War I, the great pandemic of 1918, and their suffering as farmers in the Great Depression. They were devout Methodists, Protestant Christians in daily life. Born after World War II, I enjoyed the flourishing of America. My country was a land of promise with freedom of religion, and my family was active in the Presbyterian Church, a liberal Protestant Christian faith. They were not happy when I became a Unitarian Universalist. Among Unitarians, the Transylvanians began in the 16th century with uprisings and peasants' revolts. They were against the corrupt Catholic Church, which built their cathedrals on the backs of people, serfs, who were economically enslaved. It was the Reformation, when common liberal Christians, now called Unitarians, insisted that each congregation had the right to read and interpret the Bible and not have their faith dictated by the Pope. Their fight was to be recognized where Christianity was and is, in the state religion. Unitarians used reason and compassion to reject traditional teachings of the Trinity. They remembered their story, truth to power. American Unitarians, on the other hand, were 3 centuries later, in the Age of Enlightenment. We began in the struggle to separate church and state with a faith based on reason and justice, truth to power. Having won religious freedom under the guidance of a democratic constitution, American Unitarians challenged their own predecessors' Christianity. Over time, led by mostly entitled white men until the 21st century, Unitarians embraced an ever-widening circle of personal, individual beliefs in a small yet influential religious minority. So yes, we come from very different historical contexts. We have many differences. What are our common values? How does the Transylvanians' long memory of their stories show us how a Unitarian faith might survive hard times? Let me share a few common values I have seen over time. I've been fortunate to know many English-speaking Transylvanians and uncovered values hard to see behind the language and cultural differences. If you can't understand what they're saying, it's hard to know what they're saying. Here's a brief glance from my experience. Open minds look different in a traditional culture. In Transylvania, liberal Unitarians respect different beliefs. They are open to teachings, especially from science. Their embrace of Copernicus and Darwin goes back centuries. Education is central to their religion, and running liberal schools in a very prejudiced culture is a major focus of their resources. They are considered a very liberal, even radical Christian religion in Transylvania, maybe somewhat like the Catholic workers or the Berrigan's here. Some ministers there, I know, have Buddhist practices along with their deep Christianity. They are inspired and bemused by the wide theological range of Unitarian Universalists. They embrace democracy and have shaped their church around democratic practices. For example, all Unitarians have a vote in selecting their national leader, the bishop, who is elected for life. Their fight for governmental democracy has been at a great cost, lost in many battles, such as the 1848 Hungarian Revolution and the Hungarian uprisings of the 1950s. Finally, they have made a step toward freedom in the 1989 overthrow of the brutal communist dictator Ceausescu. They are still a religion in the country that is recognized, but they continue to suffer discrimination in higher education and economic opportunities. Loving Hearts is obvious in their welcome of all faiths in their Unitarian schools and churches. In fact, this has been true historically, and today most of their students are not Unitarians, but their excellent schools are generously open. In a culture where LGBTQ plus people are not out in the open, they are openly welcomed in their congregations. Ministers are not yet ready to perform LGBTQ plus weddings and are deeply pained at their government's public and financial pressure preventing this practice. This is a very tender spot between Transylvanian and American Unitarians. Like Americans, they struggle with racial and cultural equality, often around language differences. They are a brave and humble people, familiar with long-suffering, and hold a fierce pride in their faith. I want to end with a dialogue between Transylvanian minister Joseph Cazzoni and American minister from Manchester, Connecticut, Gretchen Thomas. This account was written by Gretchen Thomas. A congregation member asked, "What has surprised you most about American UUs?" Joseph's answer was, "I'm surprised so many of you have changed your religion to become Unitarian, because it's very unusual for a Transylvanian of any faith to give up the religion we are born with. For us to do that would mean giving up who we are. In our interfaith marriages, and there are many, daughters are automatically raised in their mother's church, and sons are raised in their father's. We have a few of these non-Unitarian husbands and wives who are active in our congregations and who have come to share our beliefs, but we would not call them Unitarian, and we do not count them in our members." He smiled and added, "Now I understand why the little book that gives an introduction to Unitarian Universalism is called A Chosen Faith. The way you North Americans change your religious identity is a new and surprising idea for me." As I listened to this exchange, it occurred to me that Joseph had, after all, dedicated his life to ensuring the survival of many rural churches with a declining population. So his distress at anyone giving up their birthright religion was not surprising. Toward the end of the evening, Joseph told us, I have given more thought to the question of what has surprised me most, and there is something else about Unitarian Universalists that has unsettled me more than people here giving up faith group they were born into and adopting a new one. I'm beginning to wonder if Unitarian Universalist religious beliefs and congregational life play too small a part in their lives. What I mean is, why do you hold your faith so far from the center of your lives? I reacted defensively to that question, though it is often challenging. I strive to live by my Unitarian Universalist principles. This is Gretchen speaking. And I know my Unitarian Universalism and its values, responsibilities, and loyalties are central to who I am. But by the next day, when I had calmed down and thought more about it, I had to admit that, for me, being a Unitarian Universalist did have more to do with my ever-changing politics, my deeply rooted social values, and my profession of ministry than with my soul. If I had a serious health decision to make, I would go for help to a doctor, a friend, or a therapist, rather than to a minister. If I had a financial crisis or a windfall, I would not discuss it with my colleagues, and it would never occur to me to pray over any of it. Joseph's questions made me realize that there were too many important areas of my life where I might look more for comfort than for principled guidance from my faith and my church. And where was God in my life? Certainly not at the center. The conversation was definitely a wake-up call for me. Joseph and I have continued to talk about what he means by faith and holding faith at the center of one's life. Joseph says, the most important thing is that my Transylvanian Unitarian faith inspires me to be my best self. When my life holds little hope, my faith is what draws me again into living optimistically. My optimism rests on trust and teachings of Jesus as my guide for my life. As a Unitarian, I do not act in expectation of reward or of making the wheel of history turn. Living faithfully gives me the satisfaction of knowing I have been true to my principles and strong in my commitments, and that I have lived with integrity. I have chosen day after day to do what is right, always supported by a just and loving God. Joseph replied to our San Jose members' question, what surprises you most about North American Unitarian Universalists, with a question of his own. Why do you hold your faith so far from the center of your lives? We're now going to join in singing. And before we do that, I want to share with you, we're going to sing Finlandia, which is in our hymnal, number 318. And I'd like to say something about place names, because in Transylvania, it's very confusing, because there are Romanian names for each place. It's now the country of Romania. The Hungarians still use the Hungarian names for places, and some of the remnants of German leadership in Transylvania remains, and their German names for many places. So, for example, Kolozsvár, where I worked in the archives and is the headquarters of the Unitarians, is the Hungarian name for the provincial capital. The Romanian name is Cluj-Napoca, and the German name, which I saw on many letters in my research from the 19th century, was Klausenburg. So it can be very confusing, and even to the point where a friend of mine was working in Transylvania during the time of adoptions of babies from orphanages in Romania. And when she and I talked, I said, well, I was in Koleshvar. And she said, well, I was in Cluj. And she never knew what Koleshvar was, even though she was working in Cluj, which is Koleshvar. So you can see how confusing it can be. So after World War I, this became the reality of life there, because Transylvania had been part of Hungary. Hungary was on the losing side of World War I, and at that point they were turned over to Romania as a punishment, not necessarily to the Transylvanians, as a punishment to Hungary for the war. And so Transylvania became part of Romania. So people living in the same place, in the same house, who had spoken for generations Hungarian, suddenly were not speaking the official language of their own country. And they found that over time, the Romanians paid Romanian-speaking people in a classic settler colonial move to Transylvania, to the point that Hungarian is now a minority language in Transylvania. So with that in mind, about the time of the Treaty of Trianon in 1919, when this big switch was made, the Finnish composer Sibelius wrote Finlandia. It is a song of international hope and unity, and it's a song that Transylvanians connect with that painful, painful time when they were separated from Hungary and their motherland. So let us join in singing in English. Finlandia, it will be sung in Finnish by the Finnish National Choir, but please join in singing Finlandia, number 318.
Thank you.
Our chalice is extinguished. Please read with me our closing words on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I am Sarah Whitson, and I offer these words of closing. Because of those who came before, by Barbara Peskin. Because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. Because of and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. Let us go remembering to praise, to live in the moment, to love mightily, and to bow to the mystery. Now, let us join the choir of the Unitarian Church of All Souls, New York, as we sing Spirit of Life, number 123 in the Gray Hymnal. The All Souls Choir will first sing in Spanish, and then we will join them in English. As you listen or sing along, please remember, Spirit of life, come unto me. Spirit of life, come unto us.